Starting in 1793, children in this building began making cotton thread with the aid of simple machines. Soon, people began to realize that other goods could be made quickly, cheaply, and in large amounts using those machines. Making goods with machines came with a price, literally and figuratively. The people who worked on these machines may not have known it, but they were going to change what it meant to work, live, and consume in the young United States. Before we get started talking about the strike, let's talk fabric. Does anybody here have any experience spinning, weaving, or sewing?
Awesome. Only to demonstrate.
Only to demonstrate. Hey, that works too, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that going on in Pawtucket in 1824. Weaving, at its most basic, is turning many strands of thread into one unified piece of fabric. There's a lot of weaving with cotton happening in this village in 1824. But these women weavers who go on strike that same year are also going to be weaving threads that are not made of cotton at all. Their decision to go on strike in that early summer 1824 and the success of that strike would weave the threads of society together in new ways that would change the future of labor in Pawtucket and the nation. But of course, these women weavers are not the only people who are trying to weave society into a pattern that they like. In fact, mill owners are working very hard doing some societal weaving of their own. As a result of the success of this mill and the Industrial Revolution that follows quickly after, we can track four main changes to the daily lives of those who lived and worked in Pawtucket. Firstly, we see an increase in what we would call unskilled labor. This new mechanization of the cotton process and labor in general means that your role in the production process as a person has changed. The creation of thread and fabric from cotton, which was traditionally done by hand, is now going to be aided by the use of machines. Of course, not everything is fully automated yet at this stage. People are still very important for loading and unloading machines, monitoring for breakages, and importantly for this strike, they're still very involved in the physical process of weaving. We also see time, work, and rest beginning to be defined in new ways. Farmers and artisans, who were the people who were living and working in Pawtucket before and during Samuel Slater's time here, were used to living their days by the natural rhythms of the sun. These people, though they were not working in a mill, were still doing work. However, it was much less regimented. They had much more control over what they were doing, how long they were doing it for, and when their workday stopped and started. But as mills began to pop up in the area, you see factory owners taking over that control. And people begin to worry that they might lose their control over their time. Many people, in fact, felt that they had lost that control completely. Think about changes to work in your own time. What has it meant throughout your life to do a full day of work? That has probably changed over the course of your career. In fact, we all go through changes as workers. But in Pawtucket, working people in the early 1800s were experiencing these changes alongside greater societal shifts. This sense of loss of independence would have been amplified in Pawtucket, a community which had a deep tradition of independence dating back to the American Revolution. And another strain on this independence is water power. Dam construction for mills was a frequent point of contention with the local community. In fact, the first Brown and Almy and Slater Dam that they tried to construct for this building was torn down by local farmers. These conflicts were heightening already building tensions in the community. Coupled with these water rights, are new efforts by mill owners to achieve cultural and political power. For example, Samuel Slater establishes a Sunday school here in Pawtucket. Now, attendance is not compulsory, but the idea is that you are sending your child to that school on Sunday, their day off of work, to learn basic skills, but primarily what you're learning is how to be a good worker, the factory code. There's this interesting mythology around the founding of the Sunday school. So Massena Goodrich's 1876 historical sketch of Pawtucket tells it like this. Essentially, there are these boys, it's a Sunday morning, and they're trying to think of something to do. They don't have to work. And one of the boys suggests that they go up to Smithfield and rob Mr. Arnold's orchard. Samuel Slater happens to be walking by, and he says, "Boys, go into my house and I will give you as many apples as you want, and I will keep a Sunday school." So you start to see this idea advanced by mill owners that idleness, idle time, leads to temptation. We want to take away as much of that temptation as possible. By coming to an event like this, you all are opting in to learning about a topic. But could you imagine working 6 days a week for someone, up to 14 hours a day during the peak season, and then spending half of your one day off with that same person? Does that sound ideal? Possibly not. These changes to daily life dramatically altered what it was like to live in the new nation. Now, by 1824, Pawtucket had about 30 mills and was a hub of cotton production in the Northeast. Mills required constant and productive work. And as I said before, working at home is still work, but it's much less regimented than what would be going on in this building and the many other buildings like it. This work was not generally physically challenging. Most of it, as I said, was augmented by machines. But what it was dull and monotonous. Think about basic repeated tasks such as loading and unloading machines or replacing bobbins. And as I said, these mills were in operation 6 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day during the peak season. No workers' compensation or workers' protections as we know them, definitely not OSHA. Mill owners were constantly inventing these new ways to gain more control over their workers. Part of this was these very strict standards of behavior, punctuality, regular attendance. And these were all enforced by contracts that were often coupled with fines or the threat of dismissal. And piece rates were also still frequently used, so being paid by the amount of something that you produce, so that you always feel that constant urge to be productive. The 1820s are also years of demographic changes in mill employment. Women start to enter the workforce in larger numbers. Now, in some contexts, weaving was considered to be women's work. In others, where it was considered to be more skilled, it was generally reserved for men who had better protections, such as guilds. If you think about the history of cooking, if anyone's familiar with that, weaving is somewhat similar. Men traditionally getting the title of chef, while women do the somewhat unseen labor of home cooking. Very similar with weaving. In 1814, Francis Cabot Lowell creates the first successful American power loom by copying the English design and modifying it. Now, when that happens, the percentage of children in the workforce slowly begins to shrink, while the percentage of women slowly begins to grow. Now, these women who were entering the workforce in Pawtucket would be affected by a decision made by the local mill owners, and they would react in kind. These women had come face to face with a changing society, But they weren't only reacting to the changes and stressors of a new society. They were also reacting to a problem that all wage workers dread: wage cuts. So, on May 26, 1824, weaving mill owners of this area met together and decided that they were going to run the mills an hour longer, cut wages by 25%, and shorten meal breaks. Now, Gary Kulik, a historian, tells us that these women made $2 a week above their board, and that the mill owners considered this extravagant wages for young women, and believed that they would not receive better payment elsewhere. The women weavers, however, disagreed. The Providence Journal describes the first day of the strike like this: "When the laboring part of the community learned the result of the meeting, they very generally determined to work only the usual hours. And when the bell rung to call them to their employment, they assembled in great numbers, accompanied by many who were not interested in the affair, round the doors of the mills, apparently for the purpose of hindering or preventing the entrance of those who were disposed to accede to the resolution of the master manufacturers. No force, however, was used. The female weavers assembled in Parliament to the number, it is stated, of 102. One of the most active and most talkative was placed in the chair, and the meeting, it is understood, was conducted, however strange it may appear, without noise nor scarcely a single speech. The result of the meeting was a resolution to abandon their looms unless allowed the old prices." Other than our newspaper sources, one of the best sources that we have is from the diary of a local man, George Foster Jenks. And he is not impressed with these women. He writes, "May 26th, the people are yet unsettled, and I think we have not seen the worst of it yet. 102 weavers met at the meeting house over this river and formed a resolution not to work for less wages, nor more than 12 hours per day." So these women were undergoing drastic changes, not just to the way they thought about work, but to their way of life as well. They felt like their labor was being undervalued, and so they made the decision to abandon their looms. Now, these women who strike for better wages are embraced by their local community, who show their support by joining the strike. George Foster Jenks tells us on the first day, May 27th, 1824, 11 o'clock, "I have just returned from one of the most gloomy assemblages of people I ever witnessed. The street from the Pawtucket bank across the bridge to Isaiah Miller's shop is literally filled with men, women, and children, making a mob of a very daring aspect, formulating the managers of cotton mills in every shape, pulling and hauling, screaming and shouting through the streets. But they have mostly now dispersed. What is to be next, the Lord only knows." These mills remain closed through May 30th, with Jenks remarking that, ironically, only the mill we are standing in today continues operations, as Slater and his business partners had kept along in the old way, as straight as a line. Slater Mill is also a spinning mill, so the pay cuts would not have affected the people who were working here. On May 31st, the manufacturers try again to reopen the mills. And Jenks tells us that although they attempted to open them, very few people actually went into work, and that the factory owners perceived in this a new way of oppression. Very few people in Pawtucket were interested in breaking this strike. They had the complete or near complete support of their community. The workers were the people in control. Now, the high point of the strike, the real drama, comes on June 1st. Going back to George Foster Jenks again, he tells us that that morning was alarmed by the cry of "fire, fire, fire" at about 4 o'clock, which proved to be the stone factory. Now, the stone factory is not Wilkinson. It is another stone factory. He says, without a doubt, it was set on fire by some person or persons, as there was found concealed in bales of cotton large coals of fire. It was, however, got under before it had done much damage. The decision by the strikers to set this fire in a stone mill instead of a wooden mill is very interesting, and to me, it indicates what their true motives are. By the 1820s, stone mill construction is on the rise for obvious reasons. Everyone is afraid of fire. However, there were still plenty of wooden mills in the area. Why not burn one of those instead? Well, it seems that their intent was not to cause complete or irreparable destruction. The strikers, I think, wanted to make a statement. The strike is not about avoiding work or not wanting to work. Instead, it's about being fairly compensated for the work that you do. Now, 2 days later, the strike ends. The workers and the area industrialists reach a settlement, which was unique and very rare in a time where workers tended to be on the losing side of labor disputes. Unfortunately, there is no record of what this settlement actually is. And trust me, I have looked very hard for it. It was clearly satisfactory, though, as the factories reopened shortly after. Aside from its importance as the first industrial textile strike, the 1824 strike had immediate and impactful consequences for labor in Pawtucket and in the greater Providence area. So immediately after the strike, the North Providence Town Council calls a special session. And it was at this session that local mill owners petitioned for a night watch in Pawtucket, established, they say, due to their fear of continued arson. This watch would guard the owner's property and the town from 9 p.m. until sunrise. Industrialists react to this new sense of labor power with militants in the form of a night watch. This continues to be a trend. We can see throughout history many times where labor movements have been met with police. We can trace that back to the 1824 strike here. But industrialists are not the only people who are reacting to this new power. Early labor organization begins to occur in Pawtucket in the aftermath of the strike. For example, not long after the conclusion, actually about a week or so after, both the Providence Journal and the Providence Patriot print advertisements for a meeting of mule spinners from across the state, and their goal was to create a mule spinning society. This is being advertised as happening in the middle of a workday, disrupting production. More early labor movements begin to pop up. In 1831, the New England Association of Farmers, Manufacturers, and Other Working Men is formed, and for a time their newspaper, the New England Artisan, is published right here in Pawtucket. This association is seeking things like the legalization of labor unions, restrictions on the labor of women and children, free public education, direct election of officials, and the abolition of debtors' prison. Clearly, in the aftermath of this strike, workers and young women saw a path forward through community and early forms of labor unionization. But the most visible daily impact of this strike would have been at the Pawtucket Congregational Church. So that church no longer stands, but it would have been across the river, where I believe it's a Pentecostal church now. In the fall of 1828, the villagers of Pawtucket raised $500 for a town clock. According to the Pawtucket Chronicle, a timepiece which can be depended upon as a regulator, located in so central and public a situation as the new Congregational Church, will be of great utility in this village. All are aware of the vexatious confusion occasioned by the ringing of the factory bells at this time, and which can only be remedied by erecting a clock that will always give the time of day. With the creation of this clock, the factory owners no longer have complete control over time, marked by the ringing of a factory bell. Now, time is measurable by everyone in the community. How many of us today take the ability to take time for granted? We carry around phones or watches in our pockets. This clock, in many ways, exemplifies what that 1824 strike was truly about. The immediate causes, of course, are pay cuts and changes to hours made by industrialists. But it's also a reaction to a new form of work, one characterized by a loss of worker autonomy, dramatic changes to daily life, and a constant effort by mill owners to expand and strengthen their authority. This strike and the developments that followed it showed that these were circumstances that workers and women in Pawtucket would not passively accept, and that the desire for complete domination of workers by mill owners was far from complete. And of course, what does a clock do every hour on the hour? It strikes. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I am happy to answer them to the best of my ability. Started today, I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be commemorating this strike with our first strike festival on May 11th, 2024. It is completely free. We would love to see you all there. More information is available on our website.